Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be doing something that we have done on this channel several hundreds of times. We are going to be observing several chess games that Magnus Carlsen played, and he won every single one of these games. He won these games in a variety of fashions. Endgames, middle games, positional games, tactical and dynamic games. 4 games, 4 wins, and he won the Chess.com Classic, which is the second tournament on road to the EWC, the Esports World Cup, here in 2025. He won the only 2 tournaments to qualify. He has 200 points at the top of the leaderboard, which is the maximum number of points you can have, and he will obviously be going to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in July. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these 4 games. And if you are a recurring viewer of this channel and of the chess world in general, you should know he actually made a video recently on the Team Liquid channel where he reviewed my games, which was quite nice. That was quite interesting. And maybe I will react to that video as well. So, 4 games. Maybe I'll put timestamps on the video player for the Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience that only have the attention span to watch for 3 minutes. Here we go. His opponents were Nodirbek Abdusatorov and Maxim Vashilograf. All right, one from the upcoming generation, one from Magnus's generation. Here we go. We are going to open up with the move d4. Knight to f6, c4, e6, knight f3, and this is called the semi-Tarrasch. This is an opening that has been very popular as of late to neutralize the white position, neutralize this opening, and give some problems, to the opponent for trying to prove any sort of advantage. Okay, so we have pawn takes d5, and now knight takes d5. Knight takes d5 is the old main line. In this position, recently, people with the black pieces have been playing a mirror image capture. And then white takes, and then black takes, and then black tries to play here, and here, and here, and white doesn't have too much. Nodirbek, however, plays this clearly for a reason. Magnus plays e4, and then black takes, and then black takes again, and then black gives a check, and then black trades off the bishop, and then black castles. This is black's whole point. Black is like, I am deliberately going to go for that trade again, trade my bishop, and get this position. Now, modern day computers have shown this position is very promising for white for a few reasons. First of all, white has more pawns in the center, and that gives white a lot of luxuries. Like, first of all, white can make a pass pawn. Second of all, white can open the center and then open up the diagonal over here. That's actually the second reason. Black doesn't have enough kingside defense. White doesn't have a decisive attack on the king side, but in many lines, white begins this h-pawn maneuver or plays a bishop here and brings the queen and gets some very interesting attacking chances. And last but not least, this 2-on-1, even though if you do the math, black would actually win that battle, somehow those pawns in the long run are very difficult to defend, and white has a lot of activity, sometimes doing all this stuff. So overall, this line is out of fashion. And I've actually covered games on this channel of Magnus Carlsen winning games like this. So he plays rook c1, puts his bishop in the middle, castles his king, puts his rook in the middle, and it looks like Nodirbek is making good progress. He's developing his pieces. He's probably going to bring his rook. He's going to play h6, put his knight in the middle on the natural square. And over the next 7 to 8 moves, Magnus just gets a completely winning position out of nowhere. First, he plays h3. Just a waiting move. Nodirbek also waits. And now Magnus begins one of those plans. He begins one of those plans to attack the queen side, right? He's going to use that pawn. Now, if black plays a5, this pawn becomes very weak. White immediately plays queen e3, this, bishop b5 to get rid of the knight, etc. All sorts of different ideas. So black goes queen c7. Magnus plays rook c1, pushing the queen back, plays a5. He's just playing a very simple plan. Now, the Magnus effect is in full force when he tries to play a very straightforward attack against the person, and not even an attack, a very straightforward plan against the person, and they just completely melt. Now watch this. Nodirbek plays the move knight f6. He's attacking the pawn on e4, right? Now Magnus goes rook b1, pinning the bishop to the queen, so the bishop cannot take the pawn, and queen c8. Giving up the pawn for a pawn. But now this. And this is the second benefit of the white position, right? Or the first benefit is this big center. The point is that now, before you take this a7 pawn, you give away a pawn, but black is going to choke on the fishbone. Black's bishop is now going to be blocked. And now Magnus plays e5 attacking the knight, and he goes here, and white is better. White is better because this bishop is no longer an important piece. And now white is going to put the knight on d4, hunt down the bishop, hunt down the pawn, hunt down the knight, and argue that black's piece coordination is very bad. Now here, Nordjebek has a 1.5 minute time advantage and only a very slightly worse position. But before you know it, rook c1, he blunders. He plays too quickly. Here, he needed to play queen b7. He obviously didn't play queen b7 for a reason. I feel like he didn't want to suffer in the long run in the endgame. So he goes here. Immediately, Magnus targets the bishop, kicking out the bishop. Here, Nordjebek does something very interesting, actually. He puts the bishop on the opposite side of the board, which is kind of hilarious. And then there's this moment where the knight is pinned to the queen, and it looks like black is completely lost. And Magnus finds this very nice idea, knight f1. Knight g3 is really nasty. If you take the queen, there is a fork. But this is very clean. The queen hangs, the knight hangs, and here the best move is f4, but h4 also looks to do the trick. But Magnus correctly, or I think actually incorrectly, plays h4, because he has 2 minutes on the clock. But the point is that f4 is better. h4 ran into knight back to f5, counterattacking the queen and counterattacking the pawn, and then threatening a mate. But Nordjebek misses knight f5. He goes here, and now 2 pieces for black are hanging. The knight is able to get away, but you're going to lose the pawn in the center, and then you're going to get mated, and you're just going to get absolutely blown off the board. Magnus walks the king out, gets into the black position. 2-pawn advantage in the endgame. And I don't think Nordjebek will be surviving this. Very clinical. King takes g5, f5, f6 on the way once the bishop moves. And once the pawn goes to f5, probably there will be a resignation. And here Nordjebek resigned because you're not going to save this. Without a pawn, it's a draw. But not with 7 seconds on the clock. Okay. This next game is kind of funny. So the match situation after that first game was that Nordjebek has to win. In the first game of the match, nobody has to win, right? So you just try to play good moves. But when you have to win, when your back is against the wall, you're going to be aggressive, right? So Nordjebek came out, played the Italian, and played a very aggressive and offbeat Italian. By the way, Magnus playing this bishop to e7 move, it's unique for sure. There's no bishop on c5, so white doesn't get the typical kind of pawn storm ideas, bishop e7. I think this was played a lot recently in the match between Daniil Dubov and Hans Niemann for the long-time viewers. And watch, a5, and actually on the next move even, a6. Interesting, right? Targeting the light squares, maybe trying to put a knight on the d5 square. Overall, the position actually, I have to say, looks pretty nice, but this pawn could be a long-term liability for white. So Magnus plays queen c8. Defending the bishop, maybe a long-term targeting of this pawn. Also, maybe the knight is going to drop back to d8 and maybe you play c6. You have a lot of different ideas, just maybe. Knight d5. So we trade, and from the opening, it's clear actually Nordjebek has played the position extremely well. You know, he's giving up a pawn in the middle, but he's going to have the 2 bishops. Maybe in the long run, he will create attacking chances. But just watch how ridiculously straightforward the rest of the game plays out. Magnus fully invests in his pawn, over-defending it, not letting white get active. Nordjebek goes here, and Magnus grabs a pawn. And it's almost like poker. He's going to make his opponent show him that the pawn sacrifice was worthwhile. Now, as you can see from our graph, we are here. We're about to go to -3. Very, very quick descent. All right? f3, trading. Knight takes f3. The bishop is under fire. It's not hanging, but, you know, white is a pawn down still. He gave away the pawn to have all of this, you know, open lines. Okay. Magnus just brings the queen back. Nordjebek makes a very natural developing move. Magnus goes b5 and rook e8. Again, the computer didn't quite like this move, but doesn't really matter. Where is white's advantage? White cannot go here. White can't go here. White can't do anything. He's just a pawn down. Magnus called the bluff and just creates a completely rock-solid position. Basically asking Nordjebek, what are you going to do? And now bishop d8, offering a trade of rooks and potentially repositioning the bishop to this diagonal. And by the way, this pawn is always weak. You might win it with knight c7 or queen c8 or something. So knight f5, is there a threat? We trade the rook, and we trade the other rook. And if you take the rook, followed by knight takes d6, I think queen e6 is good enough, but maybe there's something even more vicious. Actually, I think if rook e8, you're going to play knight e8, which is, you're not even going to play queen e8. Now that I think about it, you're going to lose this pawn. You just take with the knight. So bishop back to h4. Magnus trades, kicks out the knight. The knight goes back. Queen g4. Magnus went here, and white just resigned. This is a purely demoralizing resignation. Of course, he probably would have lost the game in the long run, but look how Nodirbek had 4 minutes, even before like some of these moves. He had 4.5 to 6, and by the end of the game, it's less than 1 versus 5, and he just got nothing going. And I mean, it was a slight underperformance, I would say, from Abdusattorov, but just monstrous, just absolutely, just nothing. This is a top 10 player in the world, Abdusattorov. Young guy, next generation, young, you know, like hungry. Brain is still working, no brain fog. Probably doesn't doom scroll on Instagram, you know what I'm saying? Like, now, this was the grand final. Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, all right? Now, I just want, this is probably, I'm going to say this is probably the most impressive game of the entire video. All right, so don't click off just yet. Let's get through this game, and then for the next one, you can leave. All right, so he plays into the Sicilian. Maxim is a lifelong practitioner of the Najdorf, which is pawn takes on d4, knight f6, and a6. Magnus playing a bit of obviously a sideline, but then it kind of becomes a normal Sicilian. e5, knight back to f3. And it still resembles a Najdorf because black has played e5, so he's going to play bishop e7, bishop e6, and white is going to try to fight for the light squares. Yes, he's going to try to fight for this square right here. Bishop e7, castles, castles, and Magnus plays rook e1, rook c8. Now, white would like to play something to the d5 square. That is really the only way to make any progress. So rook c8, knight d5. Bishop takes. We have a transformation of the pawn structure. White has moved the e-pawn over here, blocks the bishop, which means that in the long run, maybe it's good for white to play something like this and get the bishop on this diagonal. Knight to a5 looks to get the bishop, and Magnus plays bishop a4. Now, what's funny is here, the best move for black is knight c4. And for reasons I don't completely understand, the computer here wants to repeat moves with bishop b3 and bishop back to a4 for some reason. And it thinks that black is in time with some very good counterplay against this pawn, and then, you know, queen takes d5, and I don't know. I mean, Stockfish is just trying to claim that, but I don't know. I think it's kind of silly, and I think there's no way Magnus would have repeated moves. And Vial goes here. Now Magnus saves his bishop. Okay. Queen b6, defends his pawn. Black making an improving move. And now Magnus plays a4. And here, this is what I mean. This is probably the most impressive move of the entire video. And I know it's there in the engine lines, but really this move is fascinating. When the move is played and I'm able to explain it to you, you very quickly realize how it makes sense. But the crazy thing is, in this position, this is white's 19th move. Black resigned after the 24th. So from this position, Magnus Carlsen won the game in 5 moves. He played g4. Same side, king side attack. When you both castle on the same side, you very rarely see stuff like this. You very rarely use the pawns in front of your own king because you're weakening your own king. But the way that the position shaped out with this brick wall in the center, black's pieces sort of got stranded. They got stranded on that side of the board, and these pieces just can't really fight off these bishops. When I explained it to you that way, like we rescued the bishop and we're going to play the move g4, you kind of get it. You know, what's funny about this position is, even if this was the position, well, which I guess it can't even be because you would play bishop takes f5, but let's say something like this was the position, there are a lot of positions where still g4 becomes the right idea. Like you try to play knight h4, some sort of g4, but black needs a lot of reinforcement. And since he doesn't have it, you play this move, and before black is able to get settled, you just have a crushing position. Pawn takes, and this is all you don't care that you open this, you don't care because g5 is coming. And this is incoming. And you're just totally crushing here. It looks like black should be able to play defense. Queen d3. That's mate. MVL plays rook f3. But that's just losing. Check here. Check here. And bishop h5. He just missed bishop h5, I guess. Maybe he calculated something else. Bishop h5, and this is just mate. What should black have done in this position? Instead of playing rook there, he could have played knight f8. And then I think Magnus really would have demonstrated complete brilliance. Like, if he had to win this position with this level of dynamics, the best move in this position is king to h1, which I'm not really sure he would have played, but he probably would have gone for some sort of bishop f5. Black would have moved the rook somewhere, and then maybe he would have played, you know, again, just improved and activated all his pieces and had this bind. And king h1 is such a fascinating move, and you basically just want to play rook g1 and just keep attacking, which is really, really wild. But instead of that, we ripped through black's position and we just mate. Now, this game, so it's the final game of the match. Look at these bars, man. Look at these bars. I think in the beginning we had the bar there. Yeah, like, look at this. It's flat, it's equal, he's better, he's winning. It's flat, he's better, he's winning. Against Nordiebeck. It's flat, he's winning. Against Nordiebeck again. It's flat, he's completely winning. One time, I think there was a moment, there was a very brief like slip up with this move h4, and I mean, it just every game is the same damn story. This time, he plays into Maxim's signature opening, the Grunfeld defense. Maxim is known for the Najdorf, and he is known for the Grunfeld. Knight f3, bishop to g7, trades. This is the main line. The main line. This is the ancient main line of the Grunfeld, c5. And historically here, look at the openings, people play the move rook b1. They also play the move bishop to a3. Another move that they play a bit more recently is bishop b5 check. And as you can see from the opening database, black has three options here. Black has knight c6, bishop d7, and knight d7. Nobody's playing queen d7 or king f8. Okay? So knight c6. You can't really play d5 because there is bishop c3, although actually d5 is not even that terrible of a move. As you can see from the evaluation, it's around equal. Castles. Black plays castles, bishop e3. All of this has been played before. And the reason why Magnus goes for this position is because black has 0 winning chances. Practically speaking here, in a must-win game, black doesn't have any winning chances. The only thing that's going to happen here is black is going to suffer. And I think part of the strategy here is that he knows Maxim is against the wall, right? Maxim's back's against the wall. He just lost the game. He might be trying to strike, and he might lose patience. It could be like a player profile read. He knows Maxim. He feels like Maxim is going to be a little bit inaccurate in his defense. Maxim takes the pawn, rook b1, b6. It looks like black is just simply going to get away with the pawn here, but bishop c5 is played. I wouldn't even be surprised. Yeah, this position has been reached actually a few times. Now this is hanging. Rook c8, bishop a3, queen d7. I think a few moves later we get a few trades. Rook c1. Okay. This is the position. All right? What does white want? Well, white is going to, again, just like in that other game against Nordiebeck, pawn majority. Target, 1 to 2, right? In the long run, maybe you play some sort of a4, a5, you instigate against these pawns. Maybe in the long run, you try to create a pass pawn. White is going to be asking the questions of the black position. The bishop goes back to e5, simple improving move. Now here, Maxim does what I think Magnus predicted he would do. He lashes out. He immediately makes the game dynamic. He deflects the rook away and goes f5. And he argues that this open file doesn't mean anything. If black had played more passively with a move like rook c8, I suppose that move doesn't even work because you would be losing a pawn. But let's say white couldn't take that pawn. Yeah, black might be okay. But because this pawn is always under a target, you never get the move rook c8. So that's why f5 is played. He wants to take, weaken the pawn, etc. Magnus immediately uses the open file. Ideas like rook e6, right? The immediate punishment of playing Magnus, you weaken the e6 square, rook c6. This is the idea. You take on e4, queen e4, your bishop's hanging, that pawn's hanging. What do you do here? The best move here for black, in my opinion, my humble opinion, very difficult to find. Black has to trade the queen, lose the pawn, have a pawn 3 squares away from queening, and just go for a counterattack. d6, king f7 just in time, and somehow black is not losing. That's what you have to find. Instead, we get this. And now very simple, very clinical. We trade, and in the endgame, you have a weakness and you have a weak king. And Magnus just makes an effortless improving move, pawn to h4. And literally, on the next move, rather than playing queen f7 and going for a little counterplay, or rook f7, or rook f5, Maxime tries to force an endgame. He plays rook e8, which he knew blundered a pawn. Like, he knew this move. Why does it blunder a pawn? Because the rook attacks the queen. But guess what? The rook is defended by the queen. So Magnus has rook takes d6. Maxime must have thought, I get a queen, he gets a queen, and then I'm going to go rook a4. Right, I'm going to win the pawn. And that's what happens here. Rook e4, rook d7. But you don't have time for this move. Because d6, rook a2, and now rook e7. And the point is, you're not fast enough to stop me. Rook d2, d7, and because your king is stuck, I'm giving a check and I'm promoting on the next move. So maybe that was a miscalculation. Maybe he hallucinated something. He has to go rook behind the pawn. But now very simple. And I said in the beginning of this video, it's so impressive how Magnus is winning games with moves like g4, dynamic chess. This game, tons of dynamics and calculation. This game, winning defensively. And this game, just pure, raw endgame technique. 4 king moves in a row, just like you were taught. Didn't touch a pawn. Look at how he plays the damn endgame. You know how you guys play endgames? You guys play endgames like this. This is how you play endgames. I gotta push all the pawns. I gotta push all the pawns. If I push all the pawns, I'm gonna make 7 queens. I'm gonna push the damn king forward. The king has to lead the way. And by the way, if you thought the king was done, he's not done. He gets the pawn out of the way. That pawn, because that pawn at least is going to stop these guys. He doesn't care about losing this. Now the pawns are equal, but the king is active. Black's king is completely passive. This is like wrestling with a Dagestani. Don't do it. All right? Sometimes they're going to force you to do it. Dagestani wrestling is on another level. Send him 2-3 years Dagestan and forget. b4, ab, ab. He doesn't even take the pawn. He just plays d6. Now MVL has 2 squares before that pawn queens. Puts the rook behind the pawn, doesn't matter. The king gets closer. Now we take the pawn, and now we are completely winning. But we're not completely winning for the reason you think. Again, you think run the pawn like this? No. It's the king that goes to the end. And it's the king that goes all the way to the end. The pawn comes forward. Now you got to push the black king away. Very instructive winning technique here. Give a check. King here. You know what's the winning move here for white? He finds it, of course. It's not a king move. Be patient. Rook d4. The black king is too far away from the promotion square. It's going to take him at least 2 moves, and he's not going to get there in time. Rook d4 is the best move. Why? Because white now will escape on the next move. Black would have checked the king and then gotten behind the pawn. For example, you play rook e4. Here, black would play king f7, and if you go king here, I give a check. You run away. I give a check. You run all the way away. Now I stop the pawn. Of course, you would keep running around somewhere here. That's why we put the rook on d4, because now I don't ever get behind the pawn. So you go here, I run, check, I run, check. It doesn't matter. Check, here, check, boop. Pawn is always promoting. Rook d4, MVL resigned. Magnus Carlsen was asked after this tournament, because after this tournament, this online Chess.com Classic, he's playing in Norway Chess, which at the time of recording this video begins in a few days. Norway Chess, classical chess. They said, do you feel like you got some practice and some warm-ups for Norway Chess? You know what he said? He said, no, because I won this tournament in too few games and I wasn't challenged enough. I got nothing else to say. Enjoy the time that he's still playing and winning basically everything, because we're not going to see greatness like this for at least another decade, maybe 2 decades. I don't think anybody from the next generation of chess players is going to break apart from their peers to the level like this man has. Chess has historically always had one genius. Kasparov, there has been Fischer, Karpov during his heyday. But normally the World Championship is owned by a person for 10 years plus. It's just sort of, we have periods that's sort of hotly contested. We have a lot of, we have the Kramnik, Anand Topalov era, etc. in the early 2000s. enjoy it while you can, because I don't think it's going to happen for a very long time. That's all I have for you today. Get out of here.